Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Héloïse and I am a fourth year, so hopefully, fingers crossed, last year, PhD student in law. And throughout most of these years, I guess officially starting in August 2020 for the sort of official starting date for my first job, but I have been working academic jobs essentially non-stop. One of them has been obviously going on for 2.5 years. That's been easy, but then there's been other things popping up. So my presentation today is on academic jobs during the PhD, what they are specifically, because there is maybe a bit more than one might expect, where you can find them. And also I've been sort of thinking about the reasons why one should or should not take them. Obviously, this is all personal choice. So this is just kind of general advice. I am in the social science department, the law department specifically. So a lot of what I'm saying will be a reflection on that. So if you have extra jobs that you can think of in STEM, for instance, I can't really speak for that, but I'm sure some of the advice can be applied to that as well. And obviously, this is just about academic jobs. I'm obviously aware that a lot of other people do jobs outside of academia to support themselves during their PhD, which is absolutely valid. So this is just focusing on the academic side of things. All right, does this work? It does. So what type of academic jobs can you get? So this is from personal experience. So throughout these 3-ish years for now, so I've been a general teaching assistant at GTA. So I think we've had presenters who've been GTAs before. That's a fairly common one. And it is relatively straightforward. You have to prepare, you have to teach. You're being paid for it. You're not being paid enough, but you're being paid for it. So this is relatively straightforward, usually teaching small groups of about 8 to 12 students, depending. This is something that in the School of Law, at least, they don't offer to first-year students who are there full-time, to give them a bit of time to get settled in, essentially. But from second year onwards, you can apply for it. It might be a bit different in your school, but that's how it works in the School of Law. You may be involved in grading as a GTA student. You don't have to, but you might be asked to. You can say no, but you can be involved in grading. That's usually grading essays, not exams. And there's obviously opportunities to do other jobs for the university with a GTA contract. So that is something that I've done during the worst of the pandemic. I was asked to help the university out with setting up online exams on Moodle. So essentially just, I guess, putting the exam together is a bit of a big word, but essentially so taking the usual format of an exam, taking whatever questions the lecturers had come up with, smashing them together, uploading them on Moodle, checking that the grades had been entered correctly, which was quite a lot of work, and sometimes even entering grades on spreadsheets. So that's not something the university really does anymore, as far as I'm aware, but it was quite useful to have these sort of couple of hours I could claim. Obviously meant a lot more work around December, January, and April, but this was something that was offered as a GTA. Another thing you can do is internships. So this one is not strictly personal experience. I've had other friends who've done internships. But for instance, that could be internship, well, at the research or development, or that could be internships within your own specific center. So for instance, the International Law Department has a center, the Glasgow Center of International and Security. There is an intern there who works, or at least there was for a few years, and sort of helps out our main admin person with setting up events, uploading posters, booking rooms, etc. So that's something that you can do. And then research assistant, which I will go into a bit more detail on the next slide, because I've noticed essentially two types of research assistant, the long term and the short term. So short term really is 15 hours or 30 hours contract. So we're talking about things that can be done really in a couple of weeks maximum. Long term is over months or sometimes years. So what does a research assistant do? Well, that really depends. So throughout all of my jobs as research assistant, so I've been a research assistant short term a couple of times, and I am a current long-term research assistant. I've done translation work, both writing and also sort of not quite simultaneous, but doing meetings. I've done and I will be doing editing work on articles. Research work, this is relatively straightforward, and I think a lot of short-term research assistant work focused on that. So some, a lecturer will ask you to maybe look through, for me it was look through the university library for anything about a specific General Assembly resolution, something along these lines, and essentially make a compilation of article. Maintaining a website, that's what I'm doing long-term. Organizing events, that's also what I'm doing for the long-term research assistant. But there is a lot more stuff that can fit into being a research assistant. It really is a very varied job, and you get to truly interact, particularly for the long-term ones, with all aspects of the university. I was recently battling the selective travel hub. So that's one thing that you may be asked to do, is to book travel, or at least to start the process of booking travel for visiting academics. So a very, very varied types of work. So just to show, this is the website that I was talking about. This is the long-term research assistant job that I'm talking about. So as you can see, there is a short description here. So participating in the maintenance of the website, the organization of fieldwork. This project started in 2020. So fieldwork was a little bit shelved because of the pandemic. But in the edited collection, that's the editing work that I will be doing, and I'm also participating in rating for it. So this is one potential aspect of being a research assistant, and obviously this has been a lot of tasks, a lot of varied tasks. So now that I've sort of gone through all of the, or at least some, in my experience, and it's probably a bit more particularly in STEM, academic jobs that you can do, I'm going to tell you a little bit about where to find them. So you can do it via the university itself, Glasgow Careers. I think we get emails about it fairly frequently, so you will have seen it pop up. Via your supervisors, I had one of my jobs via one of my supervisors who knew that I spoke French and asked me to do translation work. So that's useful. They usually know you, they know your strength. They might know stuff about you that other colleagues might not know. Via your previous bosses, so I worked twice for one person. So once I did some research assistant work, and once I did some help with grading, and the other one I did some research assistant stuff. And via your current job. So that was what I was saying with being a GTA. I originally thought this would only mean preparing and teaching, and then I was also involved in grading, and I was involved in helping the university set up exams. So these are all various opportunities that you can get. You don't have to have a current job to get new jobs, but it can help sometimes. It essentially allows you to have more contact with more people who can find opportunities for you. This is the screenshot of what Glasgow Careers looked like when I last took that screenshot, which I think was late 2021, but I don't think it has changed that much. Why should you not take on an academic job? So this is broad and fairly generic advice, just to sort of give you a bit of an idea of how I think about it, and hopefully some of that stuff can be translated to your own experience. So this isn't really an exhaustive list, and they're not exactly in order of priority. It's just the 4 things that I think of sort of in succession whenever I see a new opportunity. So the first thing is time, obviously. So whether or not you have the time to do what is asked of you. So for instance, if there is grading to do, but it's also APR time, because these usually happen at the same time. And also you have to finish a draft chapter, and also you have to, I don't know, do corrections on another draft you sent. It may be a little bit too much for one person. I once combined doing corrections, grading, and the APR in 1 month, and I don't know how I survived when I went through it. It wasn't the easiest month of my life. I still remember it. By that, I mean that I remember when it was, but I don't remember the month in itself. It went in a blur. So I did it because I wanted to, because there were other reasons that sort of tied into it, and there were things that I didn't have a choice about. I can't move the APR as much as I would have wanted to, but this is one thing to take into account. The second thing that I take into account, and again, this isn't on a sort of a grading scale, is money, because that's quite important. I am self-funded. I'm very lucky to get help from my parents, but I am also aware that I can't exactly ask for them to pay everything. So obviously money does matter. How much you get paid whether you get paid, obviously as a GTA, you get paid. Some internships, I think some of them can be unpaid, or at least some of the offers can be unpaid. But GTA, you are, or you should always be paid. You're not paid nearly enough, but you should be paid. Grading is paid. Working for the university generally is usually paid. So obviously there is whether or not you're being paid, but there is also how much, with relation to time particularly, but also in relation to the other two things. So these are all things that I try to take into account. Sort of, I have time for this, but is it really worth it for money? Or, you know, I do not have time for it, but it would be really, really useful for this month to have this sort of, you know, extra, however many that can be, a couple hundred, you know, to help out. So these are things that I take into account. The third one is experience, and that one I've mostly sort of seen every new job as a new experience, because I started my PhD at 22. I didn't really have a huge amount of work experience before that. So for me, that's always been I'll take whatever I can. But I've had friends who've already done some of these jobs before, who sometimes looked at an opportunity and thought, it's really nice, it would be helpful in terms of time and money, but also I've already had this experience. This wouldn't add an extra line to my CV. So maybe I should spend that time to focus on the PhD or writing an article or a million of other things that we have going on. So this is something that I take into account. For me, it's mostly been a positive, as in I'll take it because I've never done this before. I had never maintained a website before. I hadn't taught before. But these are things that you might also take into account if you've already done it. And the final one is networking possibilities. And that is, it can be very sort of gentle networking. It can just be working with someone who isn't your supervisor. A lot of the time, particularly, I was lucky enough to start my PhD right before the pandemic, and I knew some people already at the university. But for people who started during the pandemic, sometimes, you know, I talk to them and they obviously know their supervisors, but sometimes, you know, it's difficult to know the other PhD students. They usually know, we organize events, but the other lecturers, not necessarily. You don't really get to interact with them that much. You don't have classes with them. You may see them at events, but when all the events are via Zoom, it's not really an opportunity to make small talk. So doing jobs for them is a good opportunity for you to get to know them and for them to remember you. When I took on this long-term research assistant work, I had time, money, and experience in mind. I also had networking possibilities because this allowed me to work with people who were not my supervisors. And that's on a very sort of practical level. That's more people that you can ask for recommendation letters. That's more people that can, you know, remember you, more people who may be involved with organizations that you want to be involved in, for instance. And I mean, I was pretty lucky that one of my supervisors is part of it, but for instance, someone who is part of a society you might want to join in, that, you know, they could help you out, they could give you a bit of advice and help. So these are all things that I take into account. None of these really take that much of a precedence over the other overall. Sometimes one of them does. Time usually takes the most precedence. But these are all these things that I consider. There can certainly be things added to it. There can be sort of subsets in terms of networking possibilities. For instance, you know, one might be better than the other, but these are all things that I take into account. Sorry. So I basically do a rundown of them, a pro and con, see what happens, see what can be a good opportunity. I would consider, maybe if I had to put one over the other, I would say do try to get paid. For me, that's the most important because I'm self-funded. But if you are, you know, fortunate enough to be funded, then that's something that maybe you can not quite put the back burner, but perhaps that you can sort of ignore is not the right word for it, but look beyond, I guess. But for me, these are all four things that are quite important, I think. The first two might seem more important, but I really do consider the other two as well. So as a sort of conclusion for this talk, this was a bit shorter than the other talk. I was listening and thinking, oh dear, I don't have 15 minutes of presentation, I only have 10, but hopefully this was good enough. So obviously, as a self-funded student, getting a job or jobs can be crucial. Getting a long-term job was really important for me because it allowed a lot of the financial stress to sort of ebb away a little bit. This was a salaried job. This was something that I was going to get. And also we got an extension because of COVID. So this was even more important. Sort of, it's going to last until June of this year. So this has covered a lot of my PhD, basically, apart from maybe 5 months, 6 months at the start, 6 months at the end. This has really covered a lot, and it has allowed me to pay for my rent. So that's been very, very useful. It is also useful to build your CV, your professional CV, your academic CV, particularly. A little while ago, we've asked some older PhD students who had been there for a while, who were almost done with their PhD, to upload their CV amongst our group in international law. And we were looking through them, and there is a lot there, and a lot of it can actually be done. It seemed incredibly daunting. There were 5 pages each, but a lot of it was, for instance, working as a GTA, which a lot of people do. Sometimes there was lots of research assistant jobs that they had, detailed, lots of experience. So even the more sort of menial jobs can really help and can be described in a way and can have transferable skills. And also it's a good way to start and create a network around you that you can call in the future, recommendation letters, or, particular bit of advice, etc. However, it is not a decision that should be taken lightly, because the PhD obviously should always be a priority, and your supervisors will remind you of that. When I started work as a GTA, I talked about it with my supervisor just to see if, this was something that was available for me time-wise. And sometimes they may have reservations. Obviously, it is your own project. You are completely in charge of it, and you know more about what's going on in your personal life and your finance than they do. Or at least you should. I think it's very, very unlikely that they know everything about you. So ultimately, the decision should be yours. But if they express concern about the PhD, that's something that, you should take a listen to, consider it in your little sort of time tab, if you sort of want to think about it, sort of having tabs of time, money, experience, and networking. But yeah, that's all for me. Just a rather short presentation about what academic job entails. There's obviously a lot more. I know there's more in STEM, I think maybe working in a lab or things like that, which I don't really have an experience in. But that's it. That's basically the main points that I wanted to talk about today. Thank you.